Howdy, folks. Rudros here, and we are coming at you right before the 4th of July with the set championships for Ursula's return coming at you this weekend, and with set championships on the horizon, including Texas in a few weeks, I thought it would be a great time to go over some of the decks that I think you should take to these set championships. And I am not alone today. I have help from someone who is not only one of my local playtesters, this man made top 32 in Chicago, and he is quite the seasoned trading card game veteran, Mr. Justin Ward. Justin, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing, man?
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here with me.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So we're going to be talking about set championships, and we have 5 decks we're going to look at, and I'll just go ahead and tell you right now.
Correct.
So they're Emerald Steel, Amethyst Emerald, Ruby Sapphire, Ruby Amethyst, as well as Steel Sapphire. We're not saying that you can only win with these decks, but we do think these are going to give you probably the best chance. I think something like Ruby Amber is always kind of a dark horse. Like, that deck can run really hot when you see it. So, but I just don't have as much faith in it as I do these 5. Are there any other ink color combinations you want to give a shout out to, Justin?
Maybe realistically, the only one I can think of is the Emerald Amber Big Song deck. That's just about it. But I personally don't have a lot of experience with that. So I know it's more along like the rogue line than it is like tier 1, tier 2.
And we know you made top 32 in Chicago, and you were running Ruby Sapphire, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Pretty standard stock list for Ruby Sapphire, but yeah.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic. And we're hoping to get another top cut out of you at Texas as well. So, folks, the images you're seeing on the screen, we are not saying this is the exact build you should take. Most of these are actually from the Chicago tournament. So this Steel Emerald was by the first place player. Amethyst Emerald, this is the second place list. Ruby Sapphire, I think, was 3rd. Steel Sapphire was 5th. And then this is the new Ruby Amethyst list that recently won a 10K online. Again, I'm just showing you on screen just to kind of give you an idea of decks. Don't take this as, yes, you must run this exact list with this many copies. It's just for visual reference. All right, and just for formatting, I'm going to ask Justin, what are the pros and cons of these lists, why you should take them versus why you shouldn't take them. Justin, you ready to begin?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So let's start with what's considered the boogeyman of the meta. This is Steel Emerald, also referred to as Bucky Discard. Justin, if you are going to a set championship in the month of July, why should you take Steel Emerald as your deck?
Oh, man. So Steel Emerald, it's one of those decks that has probably the biggest nut draw in the entire format. Going like turn 1 Diablo, turn 2 Bucky into Diablo Shift. A lot of decks just fall super far behind whenever that comes down. So if you're looking for something super powerful and then also trying to tell your opponent, hey, you can't play cards, then I'd probably take Steel Emerald. Yeah.
Why shouldn't you take this deck?
I'm personally not a huge fan of the Steel Emerald deck, mainly because it lives and dies by Bucky and Diablo. If they get answered on curve or more efficiently than what you can do, you tend to fall behind very quickly, and it's very hard to claw yourself back out of it once you fall behind. So it's just one of those decks that has like the highest upside in the room, but it can easily just crumble in a tournament, especially if you don't know what you're doing with the deck.
Fair enough. Is there a particular deck you're worried about if you're running Emerald Steel?
The decks for sure definitely have to be Blue Steel and Amber Steel, just because of the early turn damage-based removal cards, as they're probably the most efficient at answering Diablo, as well as Bucky too. Like being able to cheat down a Tinkerbell on like turn 4 in Blue Steel can be pretty good. I don't know if Amber Steel really plays Tinkerbell anymore. I didn't really look at Zach's deck from Chicago, but I know that he was the only one, or one of only 2 or something in top 64. But as far as Blue Steel goes, you've got a lot of pretty good answers, like in Baboom, Grab Your Sword, Smash even. Then you can also play that Magic Broom card, so you have a lot to dodge. And then also the Green Steel mirrors, or not Green Steel, but Emerald Steel mirrors can definitely be a huge toss-up.
Yeah, well, and it's like this list we're looking at from Brian, he didn't run Tinkerbell or Grab Your Sword, but I've seen other versions that do just for the mirror. That way they can clear out the Bucky.
So Brian or the Rat, he's a very seasoned player with Emerald Steel. So I'm sure he knows how to navigate that mirror without having those blowout cards in the form of Giant Tink and Grab Your Sword. He is playing Let the Storm Rage on and Strength of Rage and Fire and a one random Baboom, which I think the Baboom was just a inkable concession to Diablo, but outside of that, I don't think you're ever really using it other than for ink.
Yeah. Storm Rage On is such a good answer to Diablo. Not only do you get rid of it and you draw a card, like, and it can be sung. Storm Rage On versus Brawl is like an answer to Diablo. Just
I personally think Brawl is very like overcosted removal for what it hits.
Yeah.
But it's like a necessary evil to be playing in every red or ruby based deck in the format. So something too is that like people need to remember that in the Emerald Steel mirrors that if they have an exerted Diablo, then even if you do let the Storm Rage on, they'll still be able to put their trigger in the bag in order to still draw a card.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of odd. I've never really seen a game work that way.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's like, isn't he dead before the card? Why does he see that?
So from my understanding, the game state doesn't check that Diablo should go to the discard until after a card has fully resolved.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird, but I guess it kind of makes sense. But who knows?
Okay, so moving on to Amethyst Emerald. This took second place at Chicago, and I have been practicing this deck with my girlfriend, and from what I can tell, it's just a very fast deck. It does tend to lose a little in the late game, but unlike aggro such as like Amber Purple or Amber Green or Amber Emerald, that those decks tended to run out of gas. Like they hit you really hard, really fast, and they run out of gas. But this one seems to at least have some legs in the late game with things like Merlin, Goat, the bounce package, the Rabbit. You tend to draw cards a little more. So Justin, you're going to a set championship in July. Why should you take green purple?
So if you want to take green purple or Emerald Amethyst, I have to get used to using the actual.
Oh yeah, sorry if I'm throwing you off with the
jet
colors.
names. No, you're good. If you have a format that's heavy in, for instance, Ruby Amethyst or Ruby Sapphire, this is probably the best deck going up against those, just because of how aggressive it can be. They may be able to stabilize, but generally that won't happen until you get around like the 13, maybe 14 lore point, which then at that time you can just be cheating single lures in or doing goat bounce stuff. So that's probably the only reason I would take Emerald Amethyst, is solely if I knew that I would be matching into a bunch of Ruby Sapphire for sure.
Gotcha. So why wouldn't you take this list to a set championship?
So this list, or this color combination, tends to struggle really hard against green steel and sapphire steel.
Yeah,
for
steel
sure.
is a huge enemy.
Yeah, not only because of the damage-based removal, but against the Emerald Steel deck, you have no efficient way to really take out Diablo, which is why this particular list from Chicago is playing the 2 Tinkerbell.
Yeah,
because it can allow it, when it comes into play, it can give something evasive like a fox or something, and then you can use it to take down Diablo. But you have to hope that the fox stays on board and doesn't get banished.
Yeah.
Which I think a more reliable answer would probably just be playing Peter Pan Shadowfinder, or even the one from Rise of the Floodborn, Pan Shadow.
Pan Shadow. Yeah, I was wondering about that. So I was testing that particular matchup the other night, Green Steel, Emerald Steel versus Emerald Amethyst, and the person running the Amethyst Emerald was able to bounce Diablo several times with Mother Knows Best and Kit, but while it slowed him down, it's like, okay, well, I'll just replay him, and if Bucky's there, I just trigger Bucky again, and like, it didn't really feel like an answer.
You're not getting rid of the problem. You're just prolonging it.
Yeah.
So I prefer playing decks where I actually really liked Emerald Amethyst last format. I actually played it quite a bit for the set championships. I think 4 of the 5 that I played Emerald Amethyst.
Yeah, you were really big on these colors. I was kind of surprised
Yeah.
to see you drop it, but it
Well,
obviously changed.
yeah. So I played it a lot because a lot of people were playing Ruby Sapphire around here.
Yeah.
And then also Ruby Amethyst, which at the time this deck also just had an insane matchup against that deck. I mean, you could easily lose it if you weren't smart with your resources, or they just had a better rabbit grind than you.
Yeah.
But I like this deck a lot. But this format, it's very iffy for me. Not only because of the all the damage base removal from steel that's going around in Sapphire Steel and Emerald Steel, but also because of the big Sisu. I think Empowered Sibling is what it is.
Yeah.
The 8-drop.
Yeah, that one hits a lot
Ruby.
of targets in here.
Yeah. So if you're playing against a red-blue player and they know that you're playing Emerald Amethyst, they can just be smart and plop down a turn 3 Sisu Empowered Warrior, and then on turn 6 or even turn 5, if they have a how far I'll go, they can just wipe your whole board.
Yeah,
and that can set you very far behind. I know a lot of Ruby Sapphire lists have not been playing the maximum amount of copies of Sisu. Like for instance, this one from Chicago was only playing 2. Maybe that will change. I don't know. But it's still something to consider. And then if you stumble with Emerald Amethyst too against Red Blue, it's just you just can't come back from it.
Yeah. Would you agree, and you can say this for Red Purple as well if you wish, would you agree that Queen's Castle is kind of the secret weapon in the purple decks right now?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, outside of Diablo, I think Queen's Castle is probably the best card in the format right now.
Wow. High praise.
Just because a lot of decks don't have solid answers to it, especially when it's coming down on curve.
Yeah.
And then also just a Queen's Castle that's following up a Be Prepared is just almost game breaking.
True.
At least in the red purple mirrors, it becomes very swingy for sure whenever they have a castle down. I mean, I've beaten multiple people who have played early castles and everything, but that's just because like I would conserve like my Mauis and stuff to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who will ink Maui in the early game, especially now, which I think is not correct. Just because of how prevalent not only Queen's Castle but also the Cove from Emerald Steel.
That location puts in some work, way more than I had originally anticipated. Like the amount of stuff it lets a lot of these cards just dodge that they normally wouldn't is pretty crazy.
Yeah, so like being able to pretty much cheat your Diablo out of brawl range is very good. And then for only 1 mana, not only to play the Cove but to also move it, it's solid. It's not something I would want to play 4 of, but it's definitely a very solid card, especially for allowing the other green base decks to also trade into Queen's Castle as well.
Yeah, that's huge. Was there anything else you want to say about green purple specifically?
No, I mean I think the deck's good. It shines in one specific matchup and it struggles in a few. So it's one of those decks where it's more of a meta call in order to take. If you have a lot of red blue within your meta, I would definitely 100% take this deck because it's pretty well established. That's very hard for red blue to outrace the early lore, and then once you get to the point where you're goat bouncing, it's really hard for them to win. The only time that they can is obviously if they drop a 8 mana Sisu or Tamatoa and follow it up with a dime, and they're able to outrace you that way. Right. So
yeah, well said. So speaking of red blue, this is the deck I have been playing at our locals a lot. It's what you took to Chicago. You were thinking about staying on it for the rest of the set. I know you've been trying other stuff recently. So red blue, you took this to Chicago. Why did you take this to Chicago, and why should you take it to a set championship?
So the reason why I took it to Chicago was that I felt like it was the deck that had the highest power level throughout all the different color combinations in the format. Being able to cheat out board wipes 2, maybe sometimes even 3 turns sooner than what is expected is very good. Also, the whole Hiram Popsicle engine is probably the best engine in the entire game, hands down.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of testing against Emerald Steel. I came to the conclusion that Red Blue just hands down, if you mulligan correctly, get your Hiram and Brawl early, like Emerald Steel just can't beat you.
Nice.
After one board wipe, they struggle to regain their footing, and then when you hit them with another, it's pretty much the knockout punch.
I think unequivocally this is the strongest late game deck in Lorcana.
Oh,
yeah,
100%. It's as close to a control deck as you can get to in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to go into a bunch of specific cards. I know something you and I have talked about lately is like Ice Block. It's really good for lowering stuff into Brawl range or Medusa range or Big CC range, but I know you've kind of been... And the biggest issue with this deck, and actually I guess I'll kind of lead you into the why shouldn't you take this, like, holy moly, look at these uninkables. I think this one has like 20... I mean, that's a
you've got 2, 6, 9... 13, 16, 18, 21 it looks like from this list.
That's so
which
many.
that's a lot. Whenever you're building decks, obviously you want to balance your uninkable with your inkable count. This deck can afford to play all the uninkables because of cards like One Jump Ahead, Fishbone Quill, How Far I'll Go.
Yeah.
Even though One Jump Ahead and How Far I'll Go are both non-inkable, they're like pseudo inkable cards because they turn the ink.
True.
And then Fishbone Quill just turns any card in your hand into ink. So I think that's pretty good.
So why shouldn't you take this deck to a set championship?
I want to take this deck to a set championship if you're not very well familiar with how to play it correctly. A lot of people tend to think that, oh, I've got to just mulligan for Fishbone and Popsicle and I'll be good. But there's a lot of situations where you don't even want Fishbone. Like, for instance, against Emerald Steel, I don't like playing Fishbone at all against that deck. Your hand is getting taxed enough with Bucky. So cards like One Jump and How Far I'll Go are better ramp spells in that matchup. Sure, One Jump Ahead, you lose the card, but you play it on turn 2, so it allows you to do a turn 3 Hiram in order to offset the Bucky.
Yeah.
But then How Far I'll Go not only ramps you, but also replaces itself. So it's like a pseudo draw 2 almost.
Yeah. Huge.
And then whenever you're able to go One Jump into Hiram on 3 and then follow it up with saying How Far I'll Go and then like play a Tala or something, then it can be like pretty overwhelming for not only Emerald Steel but also a few other decks. Ruby Amethyst has been getting a lot of play in the format, which it tends to have a positive win rate against Ruby Sapphire. And that's another scary thing because them being able to go to curve out on turn 2 Flynn Rider, turn 3 Sisu into a turn 4 castle. It's very overwhelming, especially if you're trying the ramp in the early games.
Yeah. And
even if you have the board wipe, like you still have the castle to deal with, which is very difficult, especially with the with people dropping Shield of Virtue and the Scar from the deck now, which that's a whole nother topic. I think those cards should be played again, but we'll see if people start to realize that or not.
One particular card in this list I want to ask you about is this Great Stone Dragon. So it's obviously a much slower form of ramp. You and I had talked about it as kind of a counter to discard, and the few times I tried it, maybe I just got unlucky, but what I noticed would happen is I'd play Great Stone Dragon on 3, because the idea is Bucky's making you discard characters, so then the Great Stone Dragon just feeds him into your Inkwell. And then my opponent would just play Aladdin and then just break it on the next turn, and so I'm like,
so
I don't know how I feel about this card. What do you think of it?
So, I think Great Stone Dragon is I want to say a good card. It's a decent card. I think it has its biggest application is honestly in the mirror match. It allows you to still ramp on your turns without getting rid of the cards in your hand, which is very significant in any of the Sapphire mirrors. But it's also a card I never want to play on turn 3, just because you never have
A character to
characters in the you never have characters in the discard on turn 3 unless it's like Bucky attacking your hand. But even then, most of the time, I would just rather convert this to ink instead of inking something than playing this out, because you're putting it on board and like potentially ramping, but then at the same time, you pretty much just Buckied yourself when you're trying to ramp to a be prepared, or like just a be prepared, or like Medusa to try and banish the Diablo. It's really weird. Like the only ramp spells I like against green steel are the one jump ahead and how far I'll go.
Stuff that pulls it from the deck, yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll put like Great Stone Dragon down in the later game once I've stabilized. But it's not something I want to put on turn 3 and be like, oh yeah, let's go. I can ramp to a turn 5. Be prepared now.
Right.
Like no, because it puts the ink and exerted. So you can't do that turn 5 be prepared with just Great Stone Dragon.
Is there a particular deck you're worried about as if you're taking this blue-red? Green purple obviously comes to mind as I've gotten run over that.
Yeah, well, green purple it's just like you're pretty much your unwinnable matchup. Yeah. So you just have to ignore that. If you queue into it, then it's just variance, and you just have to do the best that you can. Yeah. The deck I'd be most concerned about playing red blue if you're going to set championships is definitely Ruby Amethyst. The deck can grind better than you, and it draws cards better than you on a more consistent basis.
Yeah.
So being able to outgrind them, especially once they get into their engine, it's just not possible. There's a lot of times where they have like 8, 9, maybe even 10 cards in hand, and then you are dealing with cards like Be Prepared, wiping your threats. Tremaine made its way back into the deck now, and then also if you just play one Tamato and pass, then they can just be like, oh, here's me singing a King Undisputed with my Merlin Rabbit, and then I'm gonna play a snake and bounce my rabbit and draw a card. Like that's just huge tempo shift there. And then also the Flynn, just getting early lore is pretty good. Flynn alone can get to 6, sometimes 9 lore on its own before you can actually put something on board that can outpower it. Of course, that's if they were on the play. Sure. If you were on the play and they were on the draw, it's slightly like not as bad, but it's still bad in my opinion.
Yeah. Well said, sir. Is there anything else you want to add on these colors?
This deck will always be my baby. I am not a believer in Ice Block anymore, though. I think that card is just not good at the current moment. I think with the rise of locations from not only the Amethyst decks, but also McDuck Manor in the mirror match.
Yeah.
I do think Shield of Virtue has more play coming up. Just because it can allow you to double swing into a location, like one of those
Maui,
two.
Double Sisu, yeah.
Yeah, and then it can also allow you to banish multiple characters and challenge, or like quest and banish. I'm also liking the Scar at the moment again. I've only been playing it at 1, but I've been trying to test it more. But that's just because a lot of people have been going to Ruby Amethyst, and like you just need a way to answer not only the castle but clearing the Sisu off the board. It's pretty big.
It's huge, yeah. I love this deck. I've been testing it a lot. We'll see if I take it or if I'll switch a bit. This is my baby we're talking about now. This is Ruby Amethyst. I've always loved this deck.
Hey, this was my baby the first 2 sets. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I think it was everybody's baby in set 2. And don't get me wrong, like I understood it was so obnoxious and oppressive, but I still kind of like liked it nonetheless. So. This deck has kind of shifted. It's definitely gotten quote-unquote faster with the Flynn, and the Sisu line seems very prominent. You're going to a set championship. Why are you taking Ruby Amethyst?
If you want something that plays pretty consistent into almost every matchup, this is the deck for you. Its only true bad matchup is Emerald Steel, and even then, you can come out ahead in that matchup if you're very smart with your mulligan. There's a lot of people that think that they have to lore race against that deck before they clear out your hand, so they'll commit cards like Flynn Rider and Sisu to the board. But you should just be inking those, and the only cards you should be committing to the board are cards that replace themselves, whether that's Maleficent Sorceress, Merlin Rabbit, hard casting Friends on the other side. So you're just trying to keep up your hand count in order to get to the be prepared to reset the game, because like I mentioned earlier, once a board wipe against Emerald Steel happens, it's hard for them to reset, especially if they didn't have a whole bunch of Diablo draws to refuel their hand. Sometimes you have to play into the Diablo with this deck. It's just the unfortunate thing about Diablo. And it's also the unfortunate thing about Brawl being the only consistent removal for it on curve.
Yeah.
But you could play Teeth and Ambitions and go back to playing the 1/3s or playing the Cusco 2-drop. Personally, I don't like that. It's just way too narrow and it's not good enough against a bunch of other matchups.
Yeah.
It's also very bad in the mirror match. Well, I want to say very bad. It can answer Flynn Rider, but if you're putting out Flynn Rider in the mirror match, then you're just like asking for them to beat you, I guess. I personally don't like Flynn Rider in the mirror, unless I've completely taken control of the board.
Yeah.
And my opponent is not having a lot of resources in hand. That's the only time I like it. It's the same with Queen's Castle. Like, people will try playing Queen's Castle on curve on 4. Well, you want a rabbit on 4, so they'll try playing this on 5.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, it'll just either get banished by a opposing Sisu Emboldened Warrior or a Maui.
Yeah.
And Sisu in the mirror can get quite large.
Yeah, you were saying this thing could banish a castle on its own potentially.
Yeah. So the Ruby Amethyst mirror is all about your rabbit looping and card advantages. You never want to leave an exposed rabbit on board because it means that a single removal spell on that rabbit can put you incredibly behind, even though it replaces itself when it gets banished. Rabbit's the most important card in the mirror match, so that's what you should be prioritizing.
That's really good.
Trying to think. Yeah, Rabbit's probably the best card that came from Rise of the Floodborn, in my opinion. That may be like a stretch to some people because they're like, well, what about Sad Beast? And it's like, yeah, that card's good, but Rabbit just provides an insane amount of advantage.
Yeah. And it's
own.
worst as a guaranteed draw too. That's at its worst.
Yeah, guaranteed draw 2 for 4 mana on a 2/3 body. I mean, pretty much kind of reminds me of Mold Drifter in Magic, if anyone knows what that is. But yeah, I mean, I think Rabbit's a very good card.
I do want to specifically. Oh, go ahead.
What's up?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to specifically ask you about. So we've seen some of these versions of Ruby Amethyst just kind of cut these 1-drops entirely or lower them to 4, whereas in the past, it was very important to see your 1. Do you think 1-drops are necessary in this list? How do you feel about them?
So that's actually what I was just about to talk about. Ironically, I don't think 1-drops are as important as they used to be. Before, you wanted to curve out with a snake on turn 2, or like playing a Cusco. And then you just wanted characters on board to be able to bounce your stuff with. But with the current way that the metagame is, you don't want to be committing cards to the board against Emerald Steel. So the 1-drop you play, it's getting inked. In the mirror match, it's not as important anymore. Obviously, it can still be like good for just like getting 1, maybe 2 lore in at the start to put you ahead.
Yeah.
But whenever you're playing more 1-drops, you make your deck weaker overall. I know a lot of people are playing the 1-drop Magic Broom, which card's good. I personally don't like it. It's just a 1-mana cantrip that forces you to commit it to the board. And then, so if you were to play like 4 of these and 4 Chernobog's followers at this current moment, you also run the risk of, against Emerald Steel, for instance, not only do you lose a card from your hand, but if they're on the play and they're able to shift in a Diablo on their turn 2 after your turn 1, and they sing like a Strength of Rage and Fire or Let the Storm Rage on to kill or to banish your 1-drop, it just completely sets you behind. Most of the time it's a game-losing play for you, because not only did you lose the board presence, you also lost a card from your hand, so you're getting attacked by the Bucky discard as well as on-board removal, and they're also drawing cards as you're drawing cards, so you fall behind very quickly that way.
Gotcha. Well, we definitely don't want to be losing games. We're trying to win them.
No. The only matchup where I would really like a 1-drop is against Ruby Sapphire, just because
it can go faster.
Yeah, you can go faster, and they're not doing anything until turn 4, 5, 4 if they went 1 jump into Hiram on turn 3 into a turn 4. Well, that doesn't even do it unless they have a Fishbone. So realistically, they're not committing a threat to the board until turn 5.
Yeah.
Which I think Flynn just does better in that scenario. I mean, you could also take the route of just like not worrying about Flynn and just outgrinding them. But just being able to gain 3 lore turn against that deck is just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, Flynn is a beast. So
yeah,
I know you've had a lot of positive things to say about this. I know you've been practicing with it, and I love this deck. Why would you not want to take this to a set championship?
Oh, if your meta is just filled with Emerald Steel, I would not touch this deck.
Okay.
Just like, yeah, you can win against Emerald Steel. It's very difficult. You have to be smart with your mulligans. You have to be smart with your inking. You have to be smart with your resources every turn. And then, but the thing is, if they just have the nut draw, then you just can't beat it with Ruby Amethyst. Like, it's just not possible.
Yeah, Justin and I were practicing the other night, and he had this turn only on 4 ink, and he got 3 bodies on the board and ripped 2 cards out of my hand. I was just like, what?
Yeah, you can thank Diablo Shift into, what was it,
it was the
Sudden
Ursula,
Chill, and then Ursula.
Yep, and then the Diablo triggered the Bucky, and then he sang a song, and then you just played a baby Robin Hood, and I was just like, did you just play like 10 ink worth of cards on like 4? What just happened?
Yeah, yeah, and my board was pretty wide too, so it was very difficult for you. Yeah, there's also a lot of Ruby Amethyst decks that I saw that were only still playing 3 Be Prepared. I don't think that's correct. The only way you win against Emerald Steel is if you're able to get to Be Prepared.
Yeah, and they don't.
So you want
your hand.
Yeah. So you just want to make sure that you actually draw that Be Prepared. So it's weird that how Be Prepared has been in this format. A lot of people like cut it completely from their lists whenever Big Sisu came out, I guess primarily in Ruby Sapphire. But even Ruby Amethyst wasn't playing a bunch of Be Prepares off the start. I think they were only playing like 2. But as the format has progressed, like it's been slowly going back to 4, which I think has been correct. I know I played 3 at Chicago in my Ruby Sapphire deck, mainly because of a concession to the 6-drop Aerial and Blue Steel. Just because that card was a pain in the ass to deal with in testing.
Yeah.
And I was playing a Lady Tremaine in its spot, but whenever you're ramping to a board wipe against Emerald Steel, you wanted to just have Be Prepared instead of Lady Tremaine, so that's why I ended up cutting it. Unfortunately, Ruby Amethyst, you don't have the luxury of ramping into a board wipe.
Yeah.
So you just have to be really smart with your ink, only casting characters or actions that replace themselves. So and then hoping you have a brawl for the Diablo, because even if you're doing all this and they're just drawing like 3 cards off, or drawing a card every time you're trying to like play rabbit, bounce rabbit in order to get your answers.
Yeah.
Like even if you've reset the board, they still have all those cards in hand that you have to deal with, and it can be pretty difficult.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about these colors?
It's like, it's the color combination that it's the most consistent. So it's the most consistent at what it's trying to do in the game. It's the most consistent in the matchups across the board. Doesn't have any like insane auto wins like a few decks do, but it also doesn't have any insane auto losses either. Your Emerald Steel matchup's pretty close, but if you play it smart and mulligan correctly, then you can actually offset that disadvantage. Not saying that'll work every time, but it'll definitely help a lot.
Yeah, no, that's huge. That's huge, man. So last but certainly not least, possibly the best deck here, possibly the worst. I don't know. I have very different, strange thoughts on Steel Sapphire. So Justin, you're going to a set championship. Why are you taking Steel Sapphire?
Oh, you're taking a Steel Sapphire if you just want to bully Emerald Steel.
Beat it up, beat it up, beat it up.
Yeah. But yeah, so it plays very well into Emerald Steel. It can still lose to Emerald Steel though. Like if you don't see your Hiram Engine or your removal for Diablo, or even Whole New World, then it can be difficult. Now, it does tend to play better into established Buckies, just because even though you're ramping and you're losing your hand, like a single Whole New World off top of the deck can completely reset the game.
I've seen that, and I've been on the receiving end of that, of playing discard. It's like, sweet, got their hand empty. Oh, top deck Whole New World, we're back to full. I was like, huh.
Yeah, and then with the evolution of the Steel Sapphire deck into playing more Tamatoa, into playing Aerial, it actually got a better matchup into Ruby Sapphire. I still think it's not in your favor, but it's a lot closer than it used to be.
Yeah, the Aerial puts in work for sure.
Yeah, and then Tamatoas, you also have like better Tamatoas than they do. Yeah. So
I'll say the Fortisphere makes both Tamatoa and Flaversham feel kind of more consistent in this list.
Yeah. It's kind of weird just seeing 8 cards in your deck that do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Never thought I'd actually see that, but it's very good. Then there are applications where the Bodyguard can matter in order to protect your Cogsworth and all that. No, like this deck has the most consistent answers to Emerald Steel. Now, with that said,
should I ask the other question?
Oh, you can if you want. I was just about to go into it.
Okay, yeah. Well, so we know it's great against Emerald Steel. That's probably its best thing going for it. Why do you not want to take this deck?
I think that this deck has the highest skill ceiling or skill gap out of any deck in the format currently. It's very punishing if you don't know what you're doing with it. For instance, inking the incorrect card can bite you in the ass a lot. So it's very finicky, but once it gets going, it's pretty hard to stop. Now, another reason why I want to take it is just because the Steel Sapphire mirrors are just absolutely atrocious. Yeah. They just become Cogsworth wars, and that's just not fun in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so also you actually have more consistent ways to banish opposing Lucky Dimes against Ruby Sapphire.
True.
Just because that deck isn't playing item removal, whether that's in the form of Judy Hops or Glean, they're not playing either of them. but you have Beast in your deck, and not only does that banish items in the Sapphire mirrors, but it's also a 5-cost character, which means that your cards like Whole New World, if you play Let It Go, Grab Your Swords, they all get value from a Beast Hardheaded being on the board.
Yeah.
And then it's also a 4/4 body that quests for 2, which is pretty solid.
Speaking of him, I'll ask really quick, do you have a preference of like Beast or Benja? Are you more in on the Beast? Any reason to play the Benja? Or
so if you're playing Whole New World, for sure Beast is better just because of it being a 5-cost. Now you could also mind game your opponent and have a Beast in your deck, but not have Whole New World or anything, and just make them think, oh, well, they ramped and played a Beast, so I need to ramp or dump out my hand for when they hold in World.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, haha, here's a Hiram. So that's really good. I think Benja is better in other steel-based decks than Steel Sapphire.
Yeah.
Just because it comes out earlier and it plays better on curve for a lot more decks.
One thing that's always kind of, I don't know, I guess it always holds me back from fully committing to this deck is, like you said, Cogsworth is insane against fellow Steel. However, Ruby, Be Prepared, CC, all that stuff just kind of wipes a lot of this clean.
Yeah,
so I don't care about your resist.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. This deck actually kind of struggles into Ruby Amethyst. Primarily because Queen's Castle is a pretty insane card in the matchup, just because all the stuff you're doing, it just can't threaten it, and it just easily runs away with the game. Now, to offset that, you could play that new 2-drop from Ursula's Return. I forget what it's called.
There's a 2-drop? Does it deal with locations?
Yeah, it doesn't deal with locations, but it's a 4/1 that can just like deal 4, and it forget what it's called. It's that like Titan from Hercules
Argus.
or whatever.
Yeah, this guy.
Argus. Yeah, it's a 4/1, so like it threatens locations pretty easily. It can also trade into a 3-drop Sisu very well, because it makes your opponent go, okay, do I really want to quest with this Sisu? Or do I want to lose it to the Argus?
Right.
Because like if the Ruby Amethyst player just gets careless and decides to quest with that, and you have a 4/1 Argus on board, then you can just banish their Sisu and then use any removal spell to get rid of the Flynn Rider, and you've pretty much stabilized from there.
Nice.
So it's something that is you could consider. It just all depends on if you're struggling against the Ruby Amethyst deck.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other thoughts you had on Sapphire Steel?
It's actually one of the decks I haven't really played myself a whole lot. Primarily just because it's not really my style, I guess. I mean, I like playing blue. I like ramping. But I just feel like the steel cards are pretty underwhelming in the deck. You're pretty much only playing steel just because of a Whole New World and I guess Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell. But there's a lot of matchups where those cards don't do enough. For instance, Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell are just not good cards to have in any of your blue-based mirrors, particularly Ruby Sapphire. So, because they just end up as ink, which is fine, but having cards designated for ink for certain matchups, I think, can be sometimes a hindrance.
Yeah.
But that's a whole another topic.
Well, and that was part of the reason I wanted to bring you on for this video, as I think we're wrapping up here, that this meta is very weird, and personally I find it kind of unpleasant, but that you have these very lopsided games, right? I would feel a lot better about blue steel or sapphire steel, because it really beats up on the Bucky deck, but then, like you said, it can really then get beat up by these other decks, and it does seem there's a lot of, green-purple, you'll destroy red-blue, but then you'll get run over by this other stuff, so it feels very coin flippy, I guess.
So it's a symptom of what we call a triangle format. For instance, you have Emerald Steel, which I guess will, even though I think Ruby Sapphire plays a lot better into Emerald Steel than Emerald Steel plays in the Ruby Sapphire. We'll just use it as an example. Emerald Steel beats Ruby Sapphire. Ruby Sapphire beats Steel Sapphire. Steel Sapphire beats Emerald Steel. So then, like, you get into this point where you're pretty much losing to one deck on the side of the triangle, no matter what. And those formats can tend to be pretty toxic. Personally, I think this format would be a lot better if a card like Bucky or maybe even Diablo didn't exist.
Yeah.
But it's very unpleasant to be told that you can't play your cards, especially when they're attached to unconditional effects or effects that don't require any kind of ink or mana costs after you've already played the card.
Yeah.
Generally, you don't see stuff like that in other card games. I know, for instance, in Magic, it has a lot of discard spells, but they're all tied to you needing to pay mana for them.
Yeah.
Can't think of any off the top of my head, but I haven't really played competitive Magic in so long.
No, I remember when I would play on Arena, like, discard didn't feel nearly as bad there, because they would play a card that, it ripped something out of your hand, but that was their whole turn. Like, that cost everything.
Thoughtseize was like the worst feeling.
Yeah, Thoughtseize
like in Thoughtseize turn 1. Yeah. But in Lorcana, you don't have a card like that, and your duress card costs 2 mana in this game, which is bare necessities. So it's not as punishing. But then at the same time, whenever you have a card like Bucky existing, it's just, okay, well, I'm losing a card every turn. I can't deal with the Bucky because it's not questing, and I also can't deal with the Bucky because it has ward. Yeah. So I need to try getting a massive board reset and try seeing if I can win from there. And just play patterns like that just aren't fun.
Yeah.
And the only decks that can consistently do well against Bucky, like all the cards that can do well against Bucky and Diablo are all in steel. Yeah. And being kind of being confined to playing one color and with any X other color, it's just polarizing deck building for a format.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just what I personally feel. So
hey man, I appreciate your insight. So thank you so much for coming on here. Is there anyone you want to give a shout out to?
I'll just give a shout out to my testing buddy John. He tested with me a lot for Chicago, and I really appreciate that. He jammed a lot of games with me for like the 2 to 3 weeks leading up to Chicago and helped me decide. He was actually the one that made me decide on playing Ruby Sapphire.
Nice.
So yeah, like I was pretty sure I was gonna play Emerald Steel just because of how toxic Bucky and Diablo are together.
Yeah.
But once we narrowed down a list and decided on a few things to cut, like it got a lot easier, and it just made me realize that Ruby Sapphire was just overall most powerful deck. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man. That's great. Well, folks, you heard it here first. A lot of good information from you. Again, Justin is a very good player. He makes top cuts pretty well for a reason, and hopefully that helped you kind of decide maybe what you're thinking for these set championships. I wish everybody the best of luck. Hope you can snag yourself a nice Ursula card, Ursula playmat. Justin, thank you so much for joining me. Can't wait to play again at locals, and I'm sure I will see you at a set championship.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out.
Always a pleasure, sir. Folks, best of luck. Until next time, let me know what your choice is in the comments below. Let me know if you can win some of these set championships. I always love hearing from everybody. Until next time, take care.
Adios.